Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is interactive, so get started in the chat. I'll be sharing more as we go. Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So I'm Casey Alderetti. I'm just the session moderator here, but I'm really excited to hear from Alex. This is Alex de Aranzeta. She is a negotiator, mediator, and linguist by education, startup founder, and communication coach. She has a deep background in mediation, negotiation, and dispute resolution, as well as building diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. She spent a decade working in civil rights and compliance across government, higher ed, and enterprise. Alex is the founder of Laurel, an HR tech startup for HRBPs, and also runs an executive coaching and communication consultancy called Accessity. She's also creator in the food space and an aspiring sommelier. So I am going to drop off camera, but I will be here in the chat. So if you have questions, please, keep them coming. And there may be opportunities to jump up on stage and ask your questions live of Alex too. So please feel free to get involved in this workshop. Thanks, Alex.
No, thank you so much, Casey, who is excited to be here today. I would say everybody. Yeah, definitely. Wow, what an amazing day so far. And thank you all for attending and dropping by. And thank you so much, Casey, for all your help and all your support. This is going to be great. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you just maybe missed the prompt, it's at the top of the chat. Anytime you feel free to drop your info so that we can all connect. And also there was a question in there about kind of what was the most recent product related question that you asked, and how did it go? It might have even have been earlier today. So go ahead and drop that in the chat. Let's get talking about product. Let's get asking questions about product. And that's why we're here, right? To elevate our ask, get what we want, and unpack what that means. And so it's only fitting that we begin the session with a question. And so, what we're going to learn today, or cover rather, is the power of questions, the foundations of what makes a great question, right? We love frameworks. I don't know about you, but I do. And then kind of run through some question types and practice to make it easily digestible.
Actually, Alex, you're showing as muted in the session, but I can hear you. I could hear you this whole time, but it sounds like other people could not. Are you so on strange. 2 machines maybe?
Not on 2 machines.
Okay, yeah, they can hear me, but not you. Oh, some people can hear Alex. Okay, if some people can hear Alex, then we're going to continue. But I do see like a muted thing. So, okay. All right. Sorry to interrupt. Okay,
no
we'll keep going.
I'm sorry. I'm glad some of us, it sounds like the majority perhaps can hear. And hopefully we can figure this out.
Okay, I'll check on that.
All right. Anyhow, if you can't hear me, or if you're wondering if this is going to improve, the slides, feel free. The slides are pretty comprehensive. So I've made it so that you can track with us together. And so hopefully you can still be able to learn even with the slides. And so jumping back to the questions, the power of questions, foundations of what makes a great question, question types and practice. You'll see a visualization, of some of these frameworks here. So for you to have and to practice with. And I really want to kick off kind of with the first question, if you will, which is, can a perfect question exist? What do we think? Just drop it in the chat. Can a perfect question actually exist? What do we think? Maybe not. Nope. No way. Not really. Perfection isn't real. Yeah, absolutely, Rachel. Perfection is an illusion. I think it can. Yep. Situationally. Okay, we've got some positive leaders here. And Natalie, yep, situationally. If it achieves your goals, then yes. Oh, that's really interesting. This is really interesting because this starts to bring up perception, right? And your own goals, aims, and objectives, when knowledge seeking or when answer seeking. And so let's hang on to these, because I think these are really context, situation. I think these are really great observations about this question. And, fun fact, I'm not going to answer this question for you today. I don't know if there is a really good answer for this question, perhaps, but it depends on many different things. And perhaps, again, perfection is not able to be achieved, but can we at least make something that achieves what we need, right? And so thinking about that, it's interesting because questions literally have been around and have been talked about and discussed for more than 2 millennia. We see here 106 BCE. That's a really long time ago, with Cicero. And, starting off with how questions were really intended for knowledge, to seek knowledge. And so this pursuit of knowledge became one of the reasons why questions existed, and it had very strong ideas about what makes a great question. And in this case, he posits that it's relevance, right? Ease, some simplicity, lack of obscurity, right? And so, interestingly, we follow this through time, and, we can see also here reputation, right? A little bit later on, fast forward a few centuries, and we have on reputation. So, judging a person by their questions rather on their answers. So different feelings about, the power of questions. Skill building, questions for skill building. It's something that you can, it's an ability. It's an ability. It's something that you can evolve, something that you can, you can grow and you can strengthen. And so, with practice and preparation, just like running a marathon, it's possible to get closer to what is a great question, right? What makes a powerful question. We see this in the possibility to change outcomes or shift future trajectories, right? Margaret Mead, anthropologist. And so thinking about, in each age, in each era, in each generation, there are a series of questions that have to be asked, that have to be explored. And, this is very, very important, right? There's some gravitas behind that, on the quality of the question. So it's introducing this idea of questions carry weight, they have impact, and perhaps can change the trajectory or influence the trajectory of ages to come and the future. And, questions simply for answer seeking, right? Ask the right questions and they will always reveal themselves. And so again, getting back to the quality of a question. And so, interestingly, let's talk about what makes a great question, right? Time for a poll. What makes a question great? Just drop it in the chat, A, B, C, or D. I'll say there's no wrong answers here, but there is one that is more right, perhaps. C. You've got B. Awesome. All right, looks like the C's are starting to have it. All right, we have B. I like that, patience. I would agree with timing. C. Okay, I think from the consensus, we have consensus here, the C's may have taken this one, and you would be correct. And so simplicity, relevance, and quality. Not to say that hopefulness isn't part of asking a good question, or the mindset, right? Sometimes when approaching a question, and similarly timing and being patient when asking a question, whether it's for the answer, but also patience with yourself and making sure that you frame that, the way that you wish. And so I think those are also really great guesses. But we're going to go with C for this one. And you would be correct. So feel free to take a screenshot here. For later, we're going to be working with a case study or two, perhaps 3 if time permits. And so this might be helpful as we reference it later. And so thinking about the foundations, what is the foundation truly? What makes a great question, right? And I think about this in three segments: quality, relevance, and simplicity. And I want to call out relevance because I do feel like relevance is kind of the most important, because that's really goal, right? And so this is, here, thinking about your need, your desire, your aim, the reason for which you're asking the question to begin with. But also quality, kind of breaking that into 2 parts, quality being depth and quality being delivery. Does anyone have a guess perhaps of depth, question depth in terms of quality? I have gravitas here, but I'd love to hear it from you. Root cause. Awesome, Casey. Yeah. Yeah, I think it ties very closely. Oh, openness to different answers. Open-ended. Yeah, getting into question types a little bit. Pain points. Thought-provoking. Yeah, truly. Depth, right? Something that's deep. It gives us pause. Rhetorical. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Lauren. So awesome. Yeah. So definitely we're thinking about, about depth and delivery, kind of think about it in two ways. So quality of a question, one can lean a little bit more than the other. And I think depth closely ties to relevance. So that being the most important thing, what's the goal of the question? But also, is there something here that's weighty? Does it matter? Is what I'm asking truly something that is significant? Can it initiate change? Is it going to be a question that is a foundation question that allows me to ask other questions toward my aim or goal? So in that case, is it a critical setup question? And so that's kind of where depth comes in, is kind of what is its function? It's more tied to function. And then when we think about delivery, purely that's how you say it, how you deliver it. And I'm speaking more about questions that are spoken rather than written, because I think that's kind of a different space. But intonation, how something is delivered, right? How are you today versus how are you today? There's a difference, same words, same language. Intonation matters, right? And then lastly, this like third component being simplicity. So clarity of language and clarity of message. And, kind of going to draw from my past a little bit in language study, which, language are really just signs, signals, words, and context, right? Words and messages. And so in this case, language is simply the words that are used. Are they words that are easily understood? Keeping it simple. And the message, this is where you have to seat yourself a little bit in the position of the audience. Could someone receiving this signal, right, this word, hearing this, or, could they, what are they gleaning from this? Is the message clear, right? And so purely this can go to construction, right? And we can think about that in terms of simplicity. And so these three things kind of in a nutshell. And an example here, I like fruit. So we're going with fruit, but insert product X and product Y. And you can kind of visualize how this would sound, right? What makes competitor better than your product? What makes apples better than oranges? Right? And so as an example here, we have relevance, which is, what is the goal? Well, what is the goal of this question? It's to understand where oranges are falling short, your own product, right? Certainly you could ask, what makes oranges great? What makes your product great? But by asking this, you're seating the audience, right? In their mind, you're seating them to already kind of be positioned and anchored by the idea of that, oh, Apple's other products are better than oranges. Okay. Well, that's easy for me to tell why, right? And so, it's just a different way of framing this question. Quality, depth. The point of this question is to uncover an important insight. Customer preference, the perception of the product, perhaps in the market. And lastly, simplicity. Is it easy, right? Is it a simple construction? Comparisons of two things, X and Y, right? It's not comparing 20 things. It's just two. And so in this case, I think it would satisfy each of these three areas, right? I still think the most important is probably the goal, and in this case, maybe depth. But that's just an example. And so I would love to just kind of work with a case study here. So we've got the last chance case study, just to try to apply this. Now, does everyone take a screenshot of this in the right-hand corner? Screenshot this page. That way you can have it to refer to when I flip to the next slide. All right, everyone's got it? Perfect. So last chance case study. Imagine, and you probably are, lead PM in a B2B SaaS company. The sales team just told you that top customer is quite unhappy with the product and that they're going to cancel. And they've actually been disappointed for quite a while. Sales has set up a meeting for you to speak with that customer. I'm going to give 2 minutes, 2 minutes on the clock to prepare a question for that meeting. There's no limit to the amount of questions here. It can be 1, it can be 10. We have 2 minutes, and just keep in mind QRS, right? Quality, relevance, simplicity, and drop your answers in the chat. Time starts now. Oh, nice. Quick one, Maddie. What would I have to do to keep your business? That's awesome. That's helping sales too. Definitely. Allison, what are you trying to accomplish that you can't with X product? What's missing from X product? Yeah, very pointed. Awesome, Tessa. Main concerns. Wow, these are just flying in. Natalie, why cancel now? These are amazing. How can we serve you better? Can you tell me more about this disappointment? Yeah. Great question, Tessa. Dissatisfaction with the product or support. Stephanie, what important needs are not being filled, right? And so these kind of get to what kind of problem is it? Let's make sure that, we've defined the problem and that, actually the right people here that can potentially solve it. Nikki, what expectations have not been met with the product? Totally. Learning more about expectations, kind of going back from the drawing board. That's what I'm seeing with all these is like, let's get back to foundations. Let's understand, initially what is the pain point? What are we actually solving for? Yes, have you addressed the concerns before? Who you're considering using instead? Yeah, Brittany. Competitor, right? Is that the reason? And what is the reason? These are amazing. These are amazing. Totally. And a lot of these are really knowledge-seeking questions. A lot of these are open-ended, right? They start with what or how, trying to learn more. Jennifer landing here with, do you have new goals or processes? Has it changed the use of the product? Really trying to understand at its very, simple origins, how is the product being used? Who is using the product? Has that person or team changed? Is the person that's kind of relaying the concerns the one that's actually using it? So are you talking to the right person when you're having this meeting, right? Or is the customer actually a representative of that team, right? And so you lose that intimacy perhaps with the pain point that's truly being experienced. And so thinking about knowledge seeking, open-ended questions, and context setting too, right? Who's having the problem? What is the problem? Is it the same problem that it was in the past? And perhaps that company has evolved, right? It evolved in a way that their use has evolved. And there's now a checkpoint in their opportunity to align on that. And so these are really great. What is the feedback from the customer? How long they've been expressing their concerns? Yeah, how long has this been going on? Great, Lauren. Absolutely. These are excellent questions, and they're all knowledge-seeking questions. And I'll hang on to that kind of term in a minute because we'll go through some of the question types and knowledge-seeking. We'll talk a little bit more about that just in a second. These are amazing. These are amazing. Gosh, we must have had about 100 questions here. Fantastic. So, awesome. Now we just talked about, we just came up with all these questions. I would say probably close to 100 questions, maybe more. And a lot of these have been open-ended. a lot of these have been knowledge seeking because you're really trying to understand, right? And I think in that sense, we're all on the same page. And also some probing questions to learn a little bit more about certain use cases, certain instances, or this particular problem, this pain point. And so when you think about questions, there are so many types of questions. There are 30 plus questions. Questions are always being kind of redefined, reimagined, recategorized. And so I wanted to focus in on really just kind of 4 types and kind of 4 situations. And so thinking about this question matrix, feel free to take a screenshot of this so it can be reference for the case study in a few moments. And so I think about questions in 4 buckets: consensus seeking, knowledge seeking, clarity seeking, interest seeking, right? And here we have this like convergence or not of conflict and advocacy. So essentially as conflict increases, and this doesn't mean really bad conflict, negative conflict. This simply just means different perspectives, perhaps, different opinions that somehow need to come together. Folks maybe that aren't on the same page or teams that aren't on the same page. And then advocacy in this case, really meaning positioning, right? So going from not having any bias, right? A very neutral or impartial question being asked to something that becomes a little bit more interest-based. And so as kind of we move along this, and using this quadrant, and when you start to move away toward the outside, we can see that interest seeking is kind of in, I would say, the most difficult position or the most exciting if you really like conflict and you really like advocacy. And so, this is where kind of questions that are very complex questions. You see lots of leading questions, reframing questions, reflective questions, even using paraphrase in a way that's strategic. This is where interest seeking gets really exciting. To unpack that in this session is impossible, but I did want to introduce you to reframing. And so you're probably reframing on a daily basis, but I would love to practice and kind of go through a really easy definition, something that you can always have in your back pocket so that it triggers and says, okay, this is reframing. I can identify this when I'm on the receiving end of this kind of question. So I kind of know where they're going. And so, we look at consensus seeking, and this is really yes, no, but I would say mostly yes. There's a way to kind of achieve consensus and, do consensus looping, I like to call it, which are micro yeses to set tone in a conversation. And usually it can be very positive leaning, particularly if there's a lot of different voices at the table, a lot of different perspectives at the table. Maybe it's not a conflict situation in a negative sense, but you're there to gain buy-in. And so consensus seeking and setting that tone for consensus or agreement is really important. For example, like presenting an idea to your boss and their peers. And so, they're still going to be on board with the business. There's going to be some shared alignment already. But, in a certain feature, a certain new product, these are all things that you kind of have to work through. And so consensus seeking is a way to do that, even with micro yeses. And these are done with questions where there are already truths that are understood or well recognized, and you can add a tag at the end, right? Here's a really easy example to get a micro yes. So you can say, hi, can I borrow your, or hey, can I borrow your pen? Yeah, sure. Easy yes. And that's a very small example, but it creates one tiny a consensus loop. Wow, the weather today is so amazing where I am. Can't you wait to go outside? Yes, it's another small agreement. Now, these are very low risk questions. These are low impact questions, but what they do, they can lead to bigger yeses about team goals, bigger yeses about when you're reframing or recapping the roadmap, that are a little bit more medium-sized yeses, things that still everyone agrees with, but it's more business focused. And so these can actually help lead to acceptance, or at least an open ear to hear about these larger asks. And so that's what they serve to do. They kind of cushion the greater ask. Knowledge seeking, open-ended questions, we'll practice those beautifully in the last case study. And clarity seeking, probing, right? So shifting from exploratory, what, how, to when this happened, did this also happen, right? To something that's when and if, right? A little bit more sharpened. So explore first, sharpen later. So Great question. So we've got a question here. Rachel, does active listening fall under interest seeking? Example, what I'm hearing you say is X, is that correct? It can, it definitely can. And so this is actually kind of like an early reframe. And so even you can even drop the first part, right? What I'm hearing you saying is this, and you can just kind of lead right in with that, right? But it's exactly that. It's using the language or the word that maybe you picked up on that someone else said, and then using that to tie to a value that you're driving. And so it's not repeating, right? It's not parroting, but it's like word plus value and framed as a question. So Autumn, can you explain how advocacy plays into this, specifically the shift from knowledge to clarity seeking? Sure. So with clarity seeking, with knowledge seeking, you're really looking to learn. That's knowledge seeking. You're looking to learn, you're looking to gather information in a very unbiased way. Example, customer discovery. As kind of you move closer to the outer edge and you move toward greater advocacy, this is where maybe not in a customer discovery situation, but maybe an expectations conversation with the customers, or perhaps with in a sales call. This is a great example of probing questions being applied. So you're really looking to really drill down on that pain point and probe even further, right? So advocacy doesn't necessarily just mean for yourself. It doesn't necessarily mean for your company. Advocacy can also mean for the customer. So thinking about the customer's needs, and that's really what that means. So awareness of the customer's needs and ensuring that they can actually express that need to you, to your team. And so that's that kind of that continuum, if you will. Does that answer the question, Autumn? Cool. I want to jump just so make sure we have time, and I think I can jump back to Suman's question. Maybe in this next activity, perhaps will be answered. But here in sampling question types, this is just a little bit of a breakdown with an example, and maybe this will give a little bit more clarity, Suman. Knowledge seeking, clarity seeking, consensus seeking, and interest seeking. So you can feel free to screenshot this as we move through the case study in just a moment. But you can see these are examples. With knowledge seeking and clarity seeking, I've kind of framed these in terms of perhaps a customer conversation. What are your thoughts on this redesign? Open-ended. Tell me your thoughts. Versus probing, right? To drill down specifically as to what they loved, and which might even lead to a conversation about what they didn't. And then consensus seeking and interest seeking kind of frame these more toward with a conversation, maybe with stakeholders internally, perhaps boss and peers, other stakeholders, partners, where you say a truth that everyone recognizes and holds dear, right? Something that is a universal value, consensus seeking, for a consensus win, right? And so this maybe is more of a medium to large yes, but that can lay up and set the groundwork for the bigger yes that you're seeking, maybe in your presentation. So increasing monthly active users is important to us here, right? Right? Something we can all agree on. I think generally everyone's heads will nod in that room. And then you kind of can help proceed, and it can lay the groundwork for the value that you're going to be presenting, right? Same thing with interest seeking, example here, reframing, right? So plus word that's previously been used. Maybe it wasn't tech debt. Maybe it was something else that Inch said, that there's some prioritization concerns. You sensed a little bit of waffling about prioritization on that team. And so you could see that really maybe what was being said, what was the concern, was tech debt. So you went ahead and used that word, right? And so now you can have a conversation around that word, so because you opened it up. And so that's an example of interest seeking and reframing. Take a screenshot of this if you haven't already. Give you like 10 seconds. All right, we're gonna jump over to just a really quick case study. Deprioritized but not defeated. No. And so using QRS and also the question types that we just covered, right? Open, closed, or knowledge seeking, consensus seeking. Think about this case study, right? The executive team just decided that they are not prioritizing and deprioritizing your idea, again, based on the feedback from Eng that it will take too long, right? That's how they're basing that conclusion. So come up with 2 questions to try and drive a different outcome. I'll give you maybe a minute. You can feel free to drop them in the chat once you have them. We'll kind of go through it again. I'm sure this will generate a lot of different questions. Awesome. Awesome, Sarah. What can be changed to ensure the idea is accepted? Yeah. Help me understand. Richika, yeah. Can we consider delivering value in multiple phases? Yeah. So it's really then actually almost an option. Reframing, it's a suggestion or an option, kind of couched as a question. It was nice, Richika. Yeah, Erica, the ROI on the project exceeds Eng's efforts, right? Yeah, do you agree? It's that tag at the end. It's like when we say right after a statement, that's usually called a tag. And it's a way to test an assumption. So sometimes you'll see, and sometimes it's a truth. So it can be used in a couple different scenarios. But it sometimes can lighten the bigger question being asked. Yeah, okay, Karishma, yeah, framing it in terms of the customer, right? What will the customer be disappointed by? Will they be disappointed? What will they be missing out on? How perhaps will this impact the rest of the stuff that we've got in pipeline? Because this might be contingent upon a couple of other things. Yeah, Anna, let's explore breaking down the project. What would we need? Is it a capacity issue? Yeah, Vithi. Yeah, let's talk about the capacity. Is it actually a capacity issue, or is it deprioritization because of desire, right? Which is probably not the case. It might be, something else. Tech debt's a real thing. So there's always going to be that, but let's figure out maybe how we can make it work with this particular initiative. Lacey, thinking about the customer, right? And even thinking about other stakeholders, how this deprioritization might actually impact other stakeholders when it comes to, in marketing, for example, and how do we get this out to the customer, right? Or sales, how are we now going to explain this to the customer? And here's what we've been hearing, and how does this affect the communication plan? Yeah, very customer-centric thinking. Absolutely. So the goal here is like shifted and kind of creating value, or at least questioning kind of shared value, right? It's testing value a little bit. Definitely. Yeah, ask Eng directly. How do we reduce the timeline? Yeah, that close partnership. Absolutely. These are awesome. I would say we have at least 50. We might have as many as last time. My gosh, the first question was just flying in. These are also flying. These are amazing. And these are incredibly diverse types of questions. I can see where some of these have taken a more position of being more knowledge seeking, right? Actually going back to the drawing board and looking to learn. Okay. And what are we missing here? Right. And some of them are actually taking a much more interest-seeking position, even so much as like to suggest options or solutions and using that in a reframe. MVP, Jasmine MVP, yes. All right, so we've got, awesome. I think we debriefed this pretty well. And so I just want to kind of take pause and the other impact of questions, and something we've been talking about, and that you see on the quadrant in the continuum, right, the matrix, is the role of advocacy in questions. And I think it has a tremendous impact on our ability to ask great questions, also to hear the signals and the messages in questions, right? And so listening, and then be able to respond, right, in a way that we feel is the right way to respond, right? And so thinking about practicing self-advocacy, I don't think we can talk about, asking great questions and formulating goals, because all part of that is having awareness of the problem and defining that problem first, right? We all know that. And so I just wanted to share just a kind of a quick framework for self-advocacy. And when I think about self-advocacy, it's in large part self-awareness, plus how to communicate that awareness and how to ask, right, questions for yourself or for others, right? Because advocacy is not just necessarily internal; it could be for the team, could be for the customer, right? Always a customer advocate, could be for a stakeholder, right? So there's advocacy that's always happening, and also for decisions, right? Making sure that the decision in the process is always advocated for. And so, thinking about that, it's very, very powerful, because it brings in a lot of different conversations about power and process and shifting that. And so here's just kind of three quick, just a very quick takeaway or quick framework for practicing self-advocacy using questions. And so for these three are really the three V's. We've got verify, visualize, and value. And so if you're really thinking about how do I work on advocacy? How do I really practice this really well? I will start with value, and that's really valuing your needs, your beliefs, your feelings. It's taking inventory, right? It's what do you value? And so it's thinking about things that you generally are guided by, motivated toward as a person, but also as a product leader. And also thinking about, if it's advocacy for others, right? Thinking about how do we accept the feelings? How do we accept the needs? How do we accept the positions? How do we accept the beliefs? How do we accept what drives others, right? And so it ends up being a conversation about appreciation, right? And kind of honoring what everyone has to do, right? And in the case of, put this in a work context, it's honoring the roles that folks have, right? And the missions that they have, right? And the responsibilities they have to their team, right? And to their stakeholders. And so that's when we talk about value. And I think a lot of you mentioned value creating options in your questions. And, value plays such a huge part in reframing. So for interest-seeking types of questions, which appear in negotiations, because they're high advocacy and also high conflict, right? And so for interest-seeking questions, these are like in a negotiation, stakes are higher. And then let's move on to visualization. And so when I talk about visualization, does anyone have a sense as to what that might mean? Not looking at the definition here. Manifesting the outcome you're looking for. Yes. This could be recording it, taking note of it, writing it somewhere, memorializing it. Beginning with the end in mind. Yeah, absolutely, Angela. Know the goal, not the answer. Every question, you should know the goal, but not the answer. Absolutely. Yeah. And so in this case, with any kind of situation where you're going to be asking questions, right? Whatever that situation is, whether it's a self-advocacy situation, right? Raise, promotion, new job responsibilities, or shifting job responsibilities, or maybe advocating for self and like, hey, I need more help on my team. I need to hire, right? And having those conversations. Or maybe it's something that's more customer discovery focused, right? Learning more about the pain points of a particular customer, particular segment, maybe markets expanding. And so, that's all knowledge seeking and clarifying questions, helping sales, right? In some cases that does happen, right? You have to kind of help sales. You're working together almost to serve a customer. And so thinking about all these situations, visualizing what is the outcome that is the outcome that you wish, right? The outcome that that everyone could benefit from, right? What is the best possible outcome? And then working backward. What are the steps you need to get to that outcome? And that can help you at each juncture by identifying, kind of working backwards, doing like almost it's the opposite of a retro, right? You're doing like, you're projecting what could the outcome be and visualizing it. Working backward, what might it take to get there? There could be several different paths, if not just one, because we know options exist, right? And different things can happen to change that path. And then, knowing what kind of each milestone is on that path, formulating questions around that helps strengthen the remainder path forward. And so going back to the matrix, going back and thinking QRS, thinking truly about, who's there, the audience, placing yourself in the audience, right? Simplicity of that message, making sure, and formulating different options for questions, and maybe even formulating a questions bank, right? For each of types of questions and a multiplicity of scenarios that you're in all the time. And then verify, taking a moment to talk about verify, using knowledge to seek, this can be knowledge seeking, so open questions, can be more interest seeking, right? High stakes, high advocacy, high conflict, and clarity seeking, probing questions. So asking the how, the when, the where, but not necessarily why, to understand yourself and others' perspectives, right? It's learning everything possibly about that context, which will naturally give you an understanding as to the motivations. And so using kind of these three things to develop self-awareness, kind of these, just to as a practice, it's always easy to go back to these three V's, right? Your value of others, visualizing outcomes, working backwards, milestones and question banks, and then verifying, right? To help you actually practice self-awareness. And so I've got a couple of questions. How do you begin with the creation of a question bank? A lot of questions are quite contextual. A great starting point. That's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. Get started with the question bank. This is where reflection and retroing is really important. I think everyone can probably remember a time, and we can even kind of do this right now. Think back to a time that was involving a customer. So you segment kind of the different parts of what you do, even look back on your day, look back on your week, start with a day. It's easy to digest and say, what did I do today? What kind of interactions did I have? And then you just kind of blanket, write out these encounters. Encounter with customer about new product, encounter with manager about XYZ, right? And start to kind of segment your different encounters and stakeholders and who were there. So, this encounter was about a new project that we have to push forward, or this encounter was about a bug fix that was really messy. And then in that, talk about what happened, right? And just something for yourself to contextualize situations. So we start with the situations, and then from those situations, you might already know the outcome. Maybe it was a little rocky. Maybe it went swimmingly, but write that outcome. And then start to think, was there any moment, in which situations or context you experienced difficulty? Was this difficult? How did you prepare for that situation? Did you prepare for that situation? Who was present, right, in that situation? And, during those situations, what were you thinking about? Was there any point that you were dreading, right? Any moment that you were a little bit fearing, right, in that situation? And what were you feeling about that? And then when that moment happened, did you say something? What did you say? And so also reflecting after the situation, after the outcome, kind of digesting not only your reaction to that outcome, but kind of what was the general feeling, right? And so really it's analyzing every part of that situation. You think of it kind of like the before, the during, and the after. And then from there, it actually helps you gain greater awareness of where you were at every part of that situation. So you can ask good questions, and using the matrix to do so, hopefully, to help you. And then I want to kind of like jump into just quickly. We may not have time for it, but I want you to at least be able to take it with you, this case study, to maybe work through on your own and practice kind of the three V's, and at least try to start to use these toolkits with that and the matrix to begin answering maybe this case study, and perhaps can lead you to other situations that you're able to apply these and analyze in your day-to-day, your week-to-week, your year-to-year, and specific milestones that you want to achieve. And so we have here, this is refocusing you, fitting a little bit with the theme for Women in Product Conference today and tomorrow. And this one is really all about you, right? You've been at the same job for 2.5 years. You've been doing super well. Your products perform well. Your team loves you. Everything's on track. No worries. But you're feeling a little bit stagnant, right? And you think you might be ready to take the leap, something new. And you just attended this conference, and it has renewed and reinvigorated your passion, your confidence, and has given you greater focus, right? On maybe what's next. And so thinking about maybe taking just 30 seconds, 10 seconds, what are 2 questions to help you frame a promotion conversation, or a new job responsibilities conversation, or hey, I want to grow my team conversation, or hey, I want to tackle this new product or new initiative conversation. If you have any initial thoughts, drop them in the chat. I'm sure we'd love to hear them. But again, keeping in mind QRS and question types, and if you feel comfortable sharing. But I want to kind of land with that today. Land with these questions are really about you and refocusing you, since that's the theme of this conference. And hopefully you can use what we've learned today for future practice, not only for self-advocacy, but also perhaps addressing conflict, learning to build trust through consensus looping, and also useful for networking. I would absolutely love your feedback. Thank you so much for your attention and participation today. And I wish everyone and the rest of an amazing conference. And here's to learning, here's to seeking knowledge, and here's to asking great questions.
Thank you so much. I am not being hyperbolic when I say that was amazing. It was like the power of the question. We talk a lot about in product management about like the power of storytelling, but questions, like this is my new tool. I'm super excited about this. Please click the review button to provide some feedback to us. This is a new format. I really enjoyed the interactivity. I really think Alex understood the assignment. This was awesome, but I think the live chat really contributed just to seeing everybody's takes. We had a couple of questions if you want to respond to them. I don't know if people want to come up and ask them live. Sarah Gagnon, if you want to request to come up, you can ask your question live or I can speak it. And then Suman, you had asked a couple of questions, and if you wanted to come up and ask if they didn't get resolved, feel free. But I will go and ask one of the questions then that's there. Sarah had said, can adding a tag at the end of a question be perceived as a weakness by others, or maybe looking for approval?
That's a really interesting thought. I think at first blush, my first thought is, in what context, what is the question, first of all, and in what context is it being asked? I think adding a tag, when used with great focus on delivery, so great focus on the quality of the question, can be really wildly successful. And actually can, and also when using that as a truth, so you have a really high quality question, perhaps it's a truth or perhaps it's an assumption. It's a very strong one. And so it's really something that everyone is already perhaps thinking or valuing. And so that is where using a tag is really, really effective, because it actually lets everyone in to, hey, I recognize this. And maybe everyone hasn't actually openly said it, but I recognize the value of this. And, adding, do we agree? Right? See, right? Adding something, kind of a qualifier, that tag at the end of that question, can actually help reinforce a value that everyone is sharing already, and brings you in. Right. And so it actually can I think in some cases it can create kind of a really great inclusion to, that value, right? Yourself in that role too.
And there was also some discussion, and I can't remember if you addressed this directly, but about why not to use why, or here, Suman is here. Maybe she's going to ask us. So let me welcome her to the stage. Hello.
Hi, Suman. Thanks for your questions.
Yeah. No, first, thank you so much for giving us such practical guidelines, and then also the case studies. That was really helpful in realizing how hard it is actually to form a question that gets you closer to your goal. But yeah, I was just curious about why we should avoid why. And I saw some chat comments saying that maybe it comes off as accusatory. But yeah, I was curious if you could expand on that.
Sure. Yeah. Thoughts about why? Why not why? No, I think that's the question. I think often people, especially PMs, right, we're always trying to dig deeper into the problem. And, one way, typically to get there is kind of by working backwards, right? 5 whys. There's a number of kind of different modalities and ways to kind of do that. I'm saying, I'm just going to suggest trying something else on for size, and maybe just being more aware of when we use why. So first, I would say that let's think of situations and think of maybe even when you're creating your questions in your question bank, how often you might use or start a question with why. And try to replace that or reframe that question using what or how, or perhaps when or if. And just see how that might change the nature of the question. I think sometimes why can be limiting, and it really will only yield one type of answer, right? It can be causal, but maybe you want a greater context around that answer that also includes the cause, right? But it actually can include outside drivers that are impacting the cause that maybe aren't readily apparent, right? Because maybe the person or individual, when they're saying why something happened and you're learning from them, let's say in a customer situation, they may think that's why, but that actually might not be why. It's because of all of these fringe things on the edge. So I think context is really helpful, and to actually get a bird's eye view and kind of look at the entire context for you to be able to understand maybe why that was happening, not the perception of perhaps why something was happening. That can be even more helpful, right? I'll use a really kind of easy, maybe rudimentary example here. The question, why did the chicken cross the road? We might have all heard this. To get to the other side, right? But let's think about that. Instead of saying, why did the chicken cross the road? Perhaps, how did the chicken come to decide to cross the road? When did the chicken cross the road? When the chicken was going to cross the road, what else happened? What propelled the chicken to cross the road? If the chicken, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can learn about, perhaps that factored into the decision-making, right? For that chicken to cross the road. Hopefully this is not the only takeaway that you take away from this talk, is that we talked about chickens, but thinking about that as an example, it can actually create almost a large picture of everything else that's happening around that environment. And so that's all. I just say I would challenge you and challenge everyone to kind of just step away from why, assess how we're using it, how often we're using it, and see if it's limiting, right? And test that assumption and see if sometimes, how or if or when or what can be a better replacement sometimes. Maybe you learn more in a shorter amount of time.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think as product managers, as someone pointed out, we're really taught to get to the why, and maybe that's our goal, but asking why directly might not be the best way of getting there. So really helpful. Thank you, Suman, for jumping up here and for your participation. Thank you, everybody, for really adding to the value of the workshop. Recordings will be posted, slides will be posted. Hopefully you all took screenshots along the way too. Really helpful just to have in your back pocket. Thank you, Alex, so much. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Casey, for the moderation. Thank you so much to Women in Product, and thank you, everyone.